Well, joining me now here in LA to talk more about all this, radio host Mo Kelly and CNN political commentator John Phillips. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you with us. Mo, to start with you, I want to kick off this conversation by playing some sound from the president. Take a listen to how he describes, in part, what's wrong with the current immigration system.
Among those hit the hardest in recent years have been immigrants and, very importantly, minority workers competing for jobs against brand new arrivals. And it has not been fair to our people, to our citizens, to our workers.
Mo, the president, they're framing this new immigration proposal as an issue of fairness. But then there are those who say this is more about identity politics. It is more about driving a wedge between communities. How do you see it?
Well, it is transparent. It changes the conversation away from Russia. It is a way to deflect from his views on Russia. How is it that he's going to be more criticizing of legal immigrants coming into this country as opposed to Russia? Is it fair to Americans in terms of how Russia has treated us? No, but he wants to talk about legal immigrants as if they are a greater threat or a greater problem than Russia and how they've treated us. I think it's very transparent. It is identity politics, the whole idea of hoping or needing to speak English instead of someone who might be coming from Africa or Latin America or South America who may not speak English. It's putting up a theoretical wall as opposed to a physical wall.
John, is this about the base at a time when the legislative agenda has stalled and there's all this pressure with Russia?
This is not the #1 issue for Donald Trump. This is issue 1, 2, and 3. There's one reason why Donald Trump won the Republican nomination. It was his position on immigration. I heard Jim Acosta reference Lindsey Graham and Lindsey Graham's hesitancy to support this type of legislation. Lindsey Graham got 1% when he ran for president and had to drop out very early on in the primaries. Donald Trump won. And I'd point out, too, that Donald Trump did better among black voters than Mitt Romney, John McCain. He did better among Hispanic voters than Mitt Romney and John McCain. Part of that reason, a huge part of that reason, in my opinion, was the issue of combating illegal immigration and cutting the number of legal immigrants to the U.S. It may not be a huge number that he got overall, but when you're talking about slim margins in states like Michigan and states like Wisconsin and states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, it really means something. He has to come through with this. There's no other option.
Yes, he does have to come through with this because he's not doing anything else. He's been unsuccessful on every other front. Yes, it's red meat for the base. Yes, it's what he campaigned on. But at the same time, when you look at his poll numbers, and they're in the mid-30s, yes, he needs to give something where people will applaud him, but it's not necessarily going to be a legislative win.
It's not just the base, though, because he won a bunch of Democrats. He won a bunch of people that voted for Obama 2 times in all of those purple states in the Rust Belt, places like Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin.
And you think legal immigration was a driving factor as opposed to illegal immigration?
If you look at the Democrats who represent those states in Congress, they talk a tough game on immigration. They may not necessarily vote a hard-line position on it, but they certainly talk that way back home.
Let me play some more sound from the president as he talks about this new points-based system. Let's take a listen.
This competitive application process will favor applicants who can speak English, financially support themselves and their families, and demonstrate skills that will contribute to our economy.
John, this focus on being able to speak English and the focus on your education and how advanced it is, doesn't that challenge the notion of this country's relationship, its historical welcoming of immigrants of all kinds?
Not at all, because we're a country, not a flop house. You can't both be a welfare state and have open border policies. You want people who are going to come here, who are going to assimilate, who are going to become Americans, accept George Washington as the father of their country, support themselves, and right now we have a policy that rewards the exact opposite.
So you're saying people are coming in and they're not becoming Americans? And what I don't understand.
Well, take the Tsarnaev family, for example, in Boston. 2 of the brothers ended up bombing the Boston Marathon
and
because they wanted to do harm to us, but the rest of them were losers who were on welfare. That family should have never been allowed in the country.
But isn't this country about having the opportunity, letting people in and giving them the chance to get there? I mean, you're making assessments, assumptions before people even get in from what it says on a piece of paper?
This country is about self-reliance, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, people who come here, who work hard, who make a living, who follow the rules, who speak English, who assimilate to American society.
Where is that written? Where is it they're supposed to assimilate? And a part of assimilation is first coming to the country, maybe learning the language, maybe learning the customs, and then finding your place within that place.
If you don't have assimilation, you end up like many of the countries in Western Europe, and the United States does not want to end up there. That was the reason that Donald Trump won this election.
About Islam?
Yeah,
because
I mean,
that's the only thing
that's the
it
question
seems
here.
like.
I'm talking about a lot of the riots that we saw in France. I'm talking about a lot of the terrorist attacks that we've seen in England, that we've seen in other Western European countries.
Like the IRA, that type of terrorism which happened in England. We can't talk about terrorism as if it only was Islamic people in the 21st century.
That's where the problem is right now. But I'm talking about
So this is really
for
about
immigrants,
Islam. Is that what you're saying?
No, for immigrants of all stripes, all of them should be able to support themselves, should assimilate into American society, should follow the rules, and I think you should get preference if you speak English, yes.
You don't think that's racist?
No, not at all.
I didn't know we had a national language here in the United States. Maybe that changed.
What about the fact you can step away from the culture, if you will, and what you could argue is racist or not, depending on where you stand. But what you can't argue with is the data, and the economic data says this country needs a growing workforce to deliver on that economic growth that the president promised his supporters. Cutting legal immigration is not taking that in the right direction, according to economists.
Well, look, economists are largely open borders people, and they want cheap labor. Cheap labor cuts people who are at the bottom of the income ladder right now, and they get to pay people less. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pick up the tab. And if cheap labor is coming into the United States to subsidize corporate America, then the American taxpayer is going to have to pick up the difference. And the American taxpayers voted on that subject this November and in the primaries, and they said enough.
Mo, I don't know if they voted on that issue specifically. I remember people were concerned about illegal immigration. I know people were concerned about building a wall to keep people who are illegally coming into the country. But now we want to lump anyone who comes into the country, legal or not, into the same
I've got
batch.
a quote for you from President Obama the day after the election, speaking to Rolling Stone magazine. He said, "It's going to be important for Democrats and immigration rights activists to recognize that for the majority of the American people, borders mean something." That was the lesson that he learned from the election on Tuesday, November 8th. That was the clear direction the American people gave Donald Trump and the Congress of the United States. Whether they choose to ignore it is up to them.
I don't think the issue is a case of whether or not you modernize the immigration system. As times change, I think people believe that systems and processes need to be updated. I think the question is how it is done, and this notion of English and the level of your education seems discriminatory and antithetical to America's notions of openness and welcome. I think that's what people are having an issue with dealing with. But I also need to ask you, because I want to get to the sanctions issue, how this squares with having a president who hires foreign workers to work on his properties. How does this square with that? I don't. John?
If I could jump in, American business does need to take responsibility. If American business is hiring quote-unquote unskilled labor, quote-unquote who cannot speak English, that is not the fault of the legal immigrant. That's the fault of the American business who is hiring them. Why are we going to blame the person for accepting a job as opposed to the business which is offering the job?
John?
Businesses play by the rules that are written by the Congress and signed by the president. Right now, we have a system that is clearly broken and needs reform, and the American people want that to happen. It reminds me of what the Democrats do with campaign finance reform. They take money from all of these special interests and go to Washington and decry the fact that special interests have influence with elected lawmakers. Well, they can refuse that money. They can say, no, I'm not going to take your money. They don't. They want to change the law, but they still take the money while it's legal.
I don't understand how conservatives can argue both sides of the issue. They argue capitalism and the free market, except when it doesn't work to their benefit.
And then we'll leave it on that issue, but I want to talk about the sanctions. I want to talk about the bill that the president signed today, which was done behind closed doors. No press, no cameras. John, no hoopla.
Oh, since when does the president crave cameras and attention? If you judge the president based on the positions that he's taken and the actions that he's taken against Russia, there is absolutely no question that he's taken a more adversarial position to Russia than President Obama. He bombed Syria. He went to Poland and said, we're bringing back the missile defense system. He pledged our support for NATO, and he signed that bill.
The pledging the support to NATO bit was a little kind of like a... Yeah.
But back in October, the same day as the Billy Bush video came out, President Obama said, in effect, that we were attacked by Russia. That's why he kicked out the diplomats, to which President Trump has done nothing to our diplomats being kicked out in Russia. To say that President Trump has been tougher on Russia is a generous read, and I would say almost disingenuous.
The president himself made it very clear he was unhappy with this bill and it was grudgingly signing it. Take a listen to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, what she had to say.
The president favors tough measures to punish and deter the bad behavior of the rogue regimes in Iran and North Korea, and he also sent a clear signal that we won't tolerate interference in our democratic process by Russia. The bill was improved, but Congress has encroached on the power of the presidency, and he signed it in the interest of national unity. We've been very clear that we support tough sanctions on all three of those countries. We continue to do so, and that has certainly not changed.
Have they been clear that they support tough sanctions, John?
He signed it.
Grudgingly.
That's the only thing that matters.
Well, no, signing is not what matters. The question is enforcement. The question is, will he seriously look to implement this? That's a whole other question.
I pay my taxes. I may not have a smile on my face when I do it, but I write the check.
Rex Tillerson has made it clear that he, as a representative of the administration, wants to make sure that there's a pathway to improve relations with Russia. They have already attacked us in a cyber sense. They have not shown themselves as a friend. They tried to harm this republic. Why this administration is so hell-bent on trying to be friends with them, at least in the short term, is beyond me. First, they said, we've had no discussions with the Russians. And they said, well, let's change that. We've had plenty of discussions with plenty of Russians. Then they said, well, President Trump had no knowledge about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians. And then he said, well, actually he did, and he weighed in with some fatherly advice. It is okay to call this administration a liar when it comes to Russia.
Before we go in, before I let you go on those strong words, the president himself put out a statement after signing this. He put out two, but I want to read part of the second one. Let's put that pilot up on screen. And John, would love to get your thoughts here. The president said this: Congress cannot even negotiate a health care bill after 7 years of talking by limiting the executive's flexibility, which is his gripe that it encroaches on presidential executive power. This bill makes it harder for the United States to strike good deals for the American people and will drive China, Russia, and North Korea much closer together, bearing in mind there has been little to show on Capitol Hill. This talk of being a great deal maker, is it not wearing thin?
Well, give the health care bill time. I still think it's not over yet. He's going to come up with some kind of compromise with Congress and get something through. But the most important thing for him by far is immigration. He's got to get this immigration proposal through. I thought the
most important thing was repeal and replace Obamacare.
No. Number 1, 2, and 3 is immigration.
Well,
Since when? I mean, we hadn't heard anything about immigration prior to today, so it would be hard for me to stomach that this was
Build the wall was the most common thing that was said besides lock her up.
Then he would have led his agenda legislatively with trying to push through this immigration bill, as opposed to health care the first, second, third, and fourth time, which all happened to fail.
I'm telling you, 1, 2, and 3, immigration.
all right. Your arithmetic aside, we're going to leave this there. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Mo,
Thank you.
John, thank you.